fire reported in the building. While this report is being verified, the building management would like to proceed to the stairway and walk to the ground floor.
Good morning, everybody. Did I wait long enough for the pause? It's my pleasure to moderate this session this morning and to introduce our speaker, Dr. Chibanda. Dr. Chibanda is a professor of psychiatry and global mental health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and the University of Zimbabwe. He is internationally recognized for his work on scalable, evidence-based, and culturally rooted mental health interventions. He founded the Friendship Bench, a community-based mental health intervention that has been scaled across Zimbabwe, with over 1 million people having received therapy on a wooden park bench delivered by a trained community grandmother. The model has been replicated across the globe in different settings, such as New York City, Washington, D.C., New Orleans, El Salvador, Vietnam, and more. He's a TED speaker, an Aspen New Voices Fellow, and his book, The Friendship Bench, How 14 Grandmothers Inspired a Mental Health Revolution, was published this year, reflecting the Friendship Bench journey and implementation. So very excited to hear from Dr. Chibanda. Before he starts, there's a few housekeeping notes, and I apologize, there is a fire drill behind me, so if you're hearing an alarm, that's what's happening in the Walker building. But this webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing from the UH Research and Education Institute website. Please mute your microphones throughout the presentation. If you need any technical assistance, please contact someone from the Research and Education team. Nicole Bollinger or Abigail Zona, who are on the call, can help you. And if you have any questions, and we hope you do, please put them in the chat. And people can see, all attendees will be able to see the questions. You can submit anonymously if you prefer. And then those of you in the meet and greet session, please stay on following the presentation and Q&A. So I will mute, and Dr. Chibanda, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm really honored to be here, to be given this opportunity to share the Friendship Bench story with you. I will just try and find my slides once again. Here we are. I hope you can all see. Right. So I've been doing this work for close to 2 decades now, where I have dedicated my professional life as a psychiatrist for training community grandmothers to deliver evidence-based therapy primarily for depression and anxiety disorders. This is a photograph of some of the grandmothers that I work with. We have numerous lessons that we've picked up over the years. A lot of them really based on the mistakes that we have made, or that I have made in this journey with the Friendship Bench. You know, when I first talked about the lessons from 1,000 grandmothers almost 10 years ago, it really kind of dawned on me how the journey has been one of kind of immersive learning. And today I'd like to share not only the story of Friendship Bench, but I would also like to share 3 key lessons that I have picked up or our team have picked up. One of them is around scaling, why Friendship Bench has been successful at scaling. The other one, the second lesson is around resilience. What is it that makes these grandmothers continue to do this work, dealing with people who are struggling emotionally, psychologically? And the third lesson is something that seems to be cross-cutting across the different regions of the world where we have been replicating Friendship Bench. And that is essentially, around vulnerability and why that seems to resonate with a lot of people. But before I get into those 3 lessons, I just want to give some background to Friendship Bench and what it is. So the Friendship Bench is really very, very briefly in a sort of brief description. It's a brief psychological intervention, which is delivered primarily by community grandmothers. So what we do at Friendship Bench is train trainers. Those trainers then go on to train community grandmothers. After the community grandmothers are trained, they are each allocated a wooden park bench in their communities. Our team facilitates referrals to those park bench using social media, other existing organizations, schools, hospitals, clinics. Folks receive anything between 4 to 6 sessions. After 4 to 6 sessions, they are encouraged to join a support group in their community. And the cycle continues. A lot of our support groups have been running for more than 10 years. And I have been working with grandmothers predominantly. We have other folks who deliver Friendship Bench across the world in different settings. We have young people. We have people living with. Sorry, I'm on a call. Yeah, I'm on a call. No, I can't help you. I'm on a call. Yeah. The joys of giving a presentation from a coffee shop. To date at Friendship Bench, we have over 3,000 grandmothers who are delivering Friendship Bench. And these are 2 of the grandmothers who I frequently relate to when I'm in Harare. But the other thing about Friendship Bench, which I really need to share in terms of its journey, is the research. We have over 100 peer-reviewed scientific publications, and this is one of our most seminal publications, which is a cluster randomized controlled trial published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, which essentially shows that after 6 months of receiving therapy from our trained community grandmothers, folks were still symptom-free. We compared therapy delivered by grandmothers versus the care of trained mental health nurses and psychiatrists. And it was really an important milestone for the organization when we did this clinical trial. And this is just a brief view of the findings linked to that clinical trial. It was effective not only for adults, but also, young adults, folks aged between 18 to 24. And the outcome measures that we looked at, which we continue to look at in all the work that we do, included the SSQ, which is equivalent to the SRQ, developed by WHO, the PHQ-9, which you will all be familiar with, the GAD-7 for anxiety, and the WHO Disability Adjusted Scale. And there was a significant difference between Friendship Bench arm, here we are, and this is the enhanced usual care delivered by mental health nurses or doctors. And so we're really excited about this. And this really has driven the model over the past, 15 years. And in all our replications, including other clinical trials, we pretty much replicate the same findings from that original study. And so in essence, the therapy around Friendship Bench is delivered from a wooden park bench. That's really what it is. This is one of our grandmothers, Grandmother Lucia, and last year alone, more than 300,000 people received therapy from one of our and when you look at clients served by place of session, which is pretty important because when we first started at Friendship Bench, our focus was delivering the model within health facilities. But over time, what has happened is there's a lot more therapy happening in the community. So this is really an exponential rise of number of people seen in the community over time. And the green line here is within health facilities. This has steadily been going down over time. Interestingly, what hasn't increased, and we thought it would increase, again, a very important lesson for us, during COVID, we pivoted and started using digital platform, a friendship bench delivered digitally, through WhatsApp and through an app which we developed. But interestingly, we haven't seen an increase in the use of digital platform in our part of the world, despite 90% of the population in Zimbabwe, for instance, having access to a mobile device. I will get back to that a little bit later, but here is a representation of where you find friendship bench. So this is the map of Zimbabwe, and all the black dots are really a place where you find friendship bench. So we have done extremely well in making it available in most of the country. And I just want to start off with that first lesson, how we've managed to scale. A couple of years back, we realized that if we were going to go big, we really needed to find a way of scaling the model in a simplified way. And we came up with this concept of the friendship bench in a box, which is literally all the lessons that we've learned on how to do friendship bench, which are sort of the 8 implementation buckets of friendship bench. And what we did was we packaged them in this user-friendly kind of DIY, do-it-yourself type kit, and we shipped the friendship bench box to regions of the country where friendship bench was being introduced. So we kind of used what you would call, I guess, for lack of a better word, a hub and spoke model, where the central office became the hub and all the new implementation sites became the spoke that received the friendship bench in a box and how to do friendship bench through this modality, with our team providing the technical expertise and ensuring particularly that fidelity was maintained. And this is how we've managed to see friendship bench really grow exponentially in Zimbabwe. And we've used the same model to replicate friendship bench in different parts of the world. And so the friendship bench has been successful also because, in addition to providing the technical skills of how to do friendship bench, we also have a digital platform where anyone who has the box can log onto the digital platform to get support on how to do the friendship bench, share ideas, learn from the mistakes that we've made, and we make a lot of mistakes, by the way, and just, really help others not to make the same mistakes that we have made over the years. And this is an example.
I think we might have some technical difficulties. Dr. Chibanda, if you hear us, oh, you're back. You froze for a little while. May you go back a few sentences?
Yeah, I was just saying this is a file photograph of some of the the grandparents who are doing friendship bench in Washington, D.C., primarily in the Anacostia area. So we have friendship benches in libraries, in wellness centers, in some of the churches, and that's really been quite impressive in terms of the numbers and how the community has responded to friendship bench. And this is another example from New Orleans, where New Orleans folks working in different diverse areas around New Orleans are doing Friendship Bench. I was in New Orleans for a visit last year, observing some of the work that they're doing. And all of this has been done through Friendship Bench in a Box, and most of it has been done virtually, where we provide the training virtually. And in some cases, we have a hybrid training element where we have some of our team members visit a place, but most of it has really been virtual. And so that's really contributed to our scale, which is, the Friendship Bench in a Box, which we send out to anyone who is keen. And that the next lesson I wanted to touch on briefly that I think, has contributed a lot to our understanding of how we can engage older folks in our communities, is how this work gives such a strong sense of purpose to older people. So during the early years of Friendship Bench, I was always worried about working with older people, particularly grandmothers who were not very experienced, who didn't have much education. And we worried a lot about vicarious trauma and how doing this work on a day-to-day basis would affect them. And so we carried out this research where we looked at post-traumatic stress disorder, common mental disorders, amongst the grandmothers doing Friendship Bench work in Zimbabwe. And we found that, actually they had extremely low rates in comparison to those who were not doing Friendship Bench. And we went deeper and carried out qualitative, research to explore what it was that made these grandmothers who were doing this work seem so resilient. And we came up with 3 key findings around what, for lack of a better word, we termed resilience amongst the grandmothers who were doing this work in very difficult circumstances. Sitting on a bench, talking to people, particularly young people, gave the grandmothers a sense of belonging. This is what came out from the grandmas who were doing this work. It gave them this sense of connection to their communities, and above all, a sense of purpose. And these findings seem to resonate across different sites and areas where we replicate the Friendship Bench. It seems doing this work gives people really that sense of purpose and belonging, whether you're in El Salvador, in Washington, D.C., or Vietnam. It's always very, very similar. And this is one of our grandmothers providing, a session with the young people and young person. And so one of the things that we really have seen coming out from this work is this intergenerational connectedness, where the grandmas help young people to be a lot more grounded, and the young people help the grandmothers to understand how to use digital devices, because our grandmothers have to upload data on a daily basis. So for every client that they see, they have to enter data based on the screening tools and the social demographic characteristics of the client they've spoken to. They use tablets or smartphones to do that. And some of them struggle with that. And we found that by pairing the grandmothers with a young person, it really helps the grandmother to be a lot more efficient with the digital device. And it helps the young people in the community who are working with the grandmothers to also be kind of grounded. This has been a really helpful way of encouraging communities to work together. And around that, one of our most recent publications was also a cluster randomized trial where we actually looked at the Friendship Bench as delivered by young people. And our hypothesis was that, young people would be better at doing Friendship Bench than the grandmothers. And other young people would feel more comfortable sitting down with a young person, kind of peer-to-peer counseling. Interestingly, that was not what we found. Yes, young people were effective, They were effective at doing friendship bench, but the uptake was more or less the same. There was no statistically significant difference between in the uptake of young people seeking services to a young friendship bencher or a grandma. In fact, when we went deeper with the qualitative interviews, what we actually found was a lot of the young peer friendship benchers were uncomfortable dealing with issues around sexuality with another young person. They also felt that they needed support from someone older to navigate some of the other issues that they were addressing on the bench. But the other thing which has sort of resulted in us at Friendship Bench to really focus on the grandmothers as our gold standard is that it's a lot more costly when you work with young people in this work. So this study, we actually, it was almost twice, it was almost double the cost of training a young person around supervision and extra care that they might need. But also young people tend to move on to greener pastures. They are not really rooted in their communities in the way that the grandmas are. And I think that the grandmas also have, these, they have all these anchors and networks in the community that they know that they can lean into to provide that extra support. So we were really encouraged by this last clinical trial that we carried out. And so when you asked me what Friendship Bench is all about, it's really about using that gold standard, the grandmas. Although depending on where we are, we use different people. In New York City, when we first went to New York City, we worked a lot with the LGBTQ plus community, and it worked. It worked extremely well. In El Salvador, we are working with Catholic nuns. So anyone can do Friendship Bench, but it's often about the cost. For me, that's really important because I come from a very resource constrained environment. I have to think of costs, and the grandmas are, just really great when it comes to that. I want to conclude by touching on vulnerability, and this is something that we have found across the different places where we've been doing Friendship Bench. For a long time, being a psychiatrist, I'm always a strong believer in structure, a strong believer in following structured therapy. If we're doing CBT, it has to be CBT. We have to focus on the components of CBT. And that's the other thing I didn't touch on with the Friendship Bench in a box. We've really had to undo a lot of our structured thinking around therapy and around how many sessions one should have. And what we've really learned is the importance of not over medicalizing human suffering. And wherever we go, whether we're in New York City, whether we're in Washington, D.C., or in El Salvador, one of the key lessons that I've picked up is that when we create that space for people to feel comfortable with being vulnerable, that's truly when healing begins. And nowadays, when we train Friendship Bench, we actually zero in on that very first big lesson around vulnerability. We teach the people we train how to create space for people to feel comfortable with being vulnerable way before we even start talking about CBT, about behavior activation or activity scheduling. We really are zeroing in on that creation of that space. How do you use nonverbal communication? How do you use empathy as a tool? We're very big on expressed empathy, the ability to make people feel respected and understood. So that's really the first pillar of our training in the Friendship Bench in a box. And then we go on to the second pillar and the third pillar. So vulnerability has been a key finding across the world. It's really something that surprised me as a psychiatrist, but it resonates across culture. And I've tried to capture a lot of these stories from around the world in the book, my book, which has recently been published, because, when we are all, gently, lovingly brought back into the fold of our community, we experience healing. And that happens when we are made to feel comfortable with being vulnerable. And I'll end with this slide, which is from Friendship Bench, Kericho, Kenya. This is a tea plantation. Again, the journey of Friendship Bench has been full of lessons. One of my first big lessons, apart from the whole name around Friendship Bench. When I first started being a psychiatrist, I thought, well, the name should be the Mental Health Bench. And interestingly, no one wanted to sit on the mental health bench when I first started doing this work. And it was the first 14 grandmas that I worked with who actually encouraged me to change the name to call it the Friendship Bench. And surprisingly, when we changed the name to Friendship Bench, everyone wanted to sit on the Friendship Bench. So that was one of my lessons, what the names that we ascribe to things can make or break them. But anyway, going back to Kenya, when we went to Kenya, again, I had my psychiatrist hat on. I was thinking very clinical in terms of where the benches should be in Kenya. And I thought, they should be close to a health facility. And when we had this great big, theory of change with all the key stakeholders, the tea pickers. So just a bit of context. The reason why we were introducing Friendship Bench in Kenya was because we had a very high suicide rate amongst tea pickers, the people who are picking tea in the plantations. Funny that, to think of the conditions. But anyway, so so I thought we should have the benches close to a health facility. And the tea pickers who were part of this theory of change workshop decided, no, the benches should actually be in the heart of the tea plantations. And the people delivering Friendship Bench should be the tea pickers themselves, because they didn't trust the health authorities. They didn't trust anyone who was medically trained. And this is just one of the tea pickers providing a session to a colleague in Kenya. And I will stop there and respond to any questions. If you have any questions, I hope you don't mind if I stop sharing my screen as well. That's it.
Thank you so much. Amazing work and amazing how you have been able to scale this. And I before we go to the questions in the chat, I guess I'm wondering about how do you adapt it for different cultures? Very different in New York City than Zimbabwe, and probably, in Zimbabwe depends on where you are. So I'm interested in hearing about that.
So I'll just explain the process. So what normally happens, the vast majority of people who invite us to introduce Friendship Bench, whether it's Washington, D.C. or New Orleans or, Vietnam, they are either part of the government, they are part of a large existing organization, and so what we normally emphasize is adapting the Friendship Bench, because we also know that the Friendship Bench, the way we do it in Zimbabwe is not always the way it should be done elsewhere. As I was saying, for instance, in New York City, we had to work with the LGBTQ plus community because that's what the New York City Health Department wanted us to do. So we had to tweak it. Also in New York City, for instance, they didn't use benches. They used these great big orange blocks to sit on. And I was skeptical coming from Africa. I thought, who's going to sit on this great big orange block, in the middle, in a public space? But the first few months, more than 60,000 people actually sat on those big orange blocks to talk to someone. So we often think of establishing what we call feasibility, acceptability, and fidelity of the Friendship Bench in a new setting, as well as preliminary evidence of effectiveness. So we don't just go into a place and assume it will work. And the way we do it is we first start off with well, our team does a needs assessment. We do our own search about the place where we're introducing friendship bench. And then after that, we run what we call a theory of change workshop, which really brings together all the key stakeholders, the people that we think are relevant to make it work. And we help and we use the theory of change to essentially come up with a visual map of how friendship bench would look like in this new setting, say in Washington, D.C. And during that process, we also explore some of the challenges. For instance, one of the big challenges we had in Washington, D.C. was the risk of litigation. How do you deal with the legal aspect of doing this work in the USA? Because you're training these grandparents who are not professionals. And so for Washington, D.C., for instance, we had to emphasize support from a trained person. And we also had to emphasize a screening process which involved someone who was professional to be able to identify if someone is a red flag, someone is suicidal, for instance, and needs to be referred on to see a psychiatrist. So we tweak the program based on the legal and structure of the place where we're doing it. So in a nutshell, that's really what we do. And all of that is outlined in our friendship bench in a box in terms of the steps that one would need to take.
Okay, so from the chat, Dr. Mavskalian is asking, what does the training of the grandmas consist of?
So the grandmas are trained over a 4-week period. And our training, when we first started running this training, we used the traditional elements of, CBT, where we focus on, the feelings, the thoughts, and how all of that influences behavior. But over time, as we began repackaging and learning from the grandmas, so just to take you back a little bit, what's in the friendship bench in a box is really the lessons that we've picked up from observing the grandmas doing this work. And so what we realized was the grandmas focus primarily on establishing, on creating this space to make people feel comfortable with being vulnerable. And so the first level training at Friendship Bench, which is the first week, is around what we call kuvura, which literally means opening up the mind, because that's the term the grandmothers coined. Your mind has to be open in order for you to be receptive of the therapy and to be receptive to connect with other people. And so we use, I guess, elements of what we would define in professional circles as, create the therapeutic alliance. What is it that we need to do in order to create that therapeutic alliance? And the grandmas have their own ways of doing that. And what we've simply done is repackaged all of that, like not using medical terms, not using words like depression, but rather using terms that are culturally grounded, terms that make people have a sense of connection with you, terms that remove the stigma that is often associated with seeking mental health care. And so we're careful with the words that we use, just, from observing how the grandmas have been doing it. So that's the first level, and that first level also emphasizes the use of empathy. What is empathy? How do you equip people to be empathic? And one of the lines that we always use when we run this training, particularly outside Zimbabwe, is, we would start, and this is how we would start a training outside of Zimbabwe. We would start with a quote from Maya Angelou, which says, people will forget what you said. People may forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And so we sort of immerse ourselves immediately on that subject of feeling. How you make people feel is very important. It's not just about the skills that you are, sort of showing or displaying. So that's the level one. It's all about those feelings, that connection. Level two is around the use of screening tools. And again, depending on who we're training and where we're training and whether the focus is, PTSD or anxiety or depression, we will use different tools. So for instance, in El Salvador, we used the PCL5, which is a screening tool for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because El Salvador has a very, very high PTSD rate. And when they invited us to do Friendship Bench, they really wanted us to zero in on PTSD. But again, you have to sort of figure out, right, if we find someone who has full-on PTSD, what do we do? These grandmas or these Catholic nuns, cannot manage PTSD. And so we had to integrate folks who were trained in the use of EMDR. It's a technique that is used in the management of PTSD, and not the Catholic nuns. So we had to bring in the psychologist for that extra level. So these are things that we're constantly having to think about depending on the condition we're looking at. The other thing as well that we do in that second level is to equip or help collaborating partners with the validation of screening tools. Because in a lot of places where we're introducing Friendship Bench, they don't have culturally validated screening tools. And so we help them to come up with, validated tools with appropriate psychometric properties so they can be used in that language or in that culture. So that level two is around the use of screening tools, the use of algorithms for referring those who are red flags, those who are suicidal. For instance, one of the lessons we've picked up is that when someone is suicidal, or when someone says, I am having suicidal thoughts, it's not always that they want to kill themselves. And so the question is, what do you do? So we introduced the second level screening, to see whether there's intent, and a whole lot of other different factors. And based on that, they are referred to someone else or they continue with therapy. So that's level two. Level three of the training, and level two is called uplifting, kusimudzira. And level three is around the actual structured therapy that I guess therapists would call, behavior activation, activity scheduling, problem solving. How do you bring all of that together? And that's the thing that we end up with. I'll stop there.
Okay. So it sounds extremely comprehensive, and it sounds like it takes a very long time when you move to a different country or different with a different population.
Yeah, it does. I mean, normally when we move into a different country, it will take us at least 6 months, because we also don't want to just rush to say, hey, this works. So we want to pilot. And as I was saying, and the pilot looks at the feasibility, acceptability, the fidelity, and preliminary evidence of effectiveness of Friendship Bench in that new setting. And it doesn't always work. In some cases, we go back to the drawing board. The pilot in Washington, D.C. took more than a year, for instance.
Okay. Actually, that sounds quick if you're going through IRBs, and it's considered research, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So we're about to publish actually the work from Washington, D.C. And that's the other thing. We always encourage our partners to publish, in peer-reviewed journals, because that's really the only way you can tell if the work you're doing is up to a certain standard. It has to be peer-reviewed.
So it sounds like you have integrated evidence-based treatments into the therapy that's happening on the bench. One of the questions is, what factors or lessons learned from work on the bench can be then integrated back into clinical interventions in clinical practice?
That's a great question. I'll talk about myself because I'm still a practicing psychiatrist. one of the key lessons for me has been the realization that every human being, first and foremost, has a story and not a diagnosis. So as clinicians, you know, we are trained to use the DSM-5 as our Bible. When someone sits in front of me, I'm trying to think, all right, what are the symptoms? Where do I place this person? Is this borderline personality disorder? Is this, you know, a major depression? So one of the lessons from the bench is to lean into the stories. So that would be the first lesson I would say that I picked up, you know, the power of stories. Every human being has a story. The second lesson from the bench, which I consistently see across the world, is, you know, the avoidance of using medical terminology. It can be difficult for a psychiatrist to not use medical terminology, but it's an important thing to always take into consideration. The other thing that I've realized is that it's important to be in touch with your own vulnerability as a therapist, as a clinician, and in the right circumstances, with the right kind of situation, it is okay, even for a clinician, to share their vulnerabilities. When I was trained as a psychiatrist, that was completely, you know, forbidden. You couldn't do that. But I've learned from observing the grandmas that it can be okay to share your vulnerabilities, provided you're aware of, you know, the sort of the surrounding space, and you're aware of the parameters around that. Yeah.
Okay. I guess that leads me to a follow-up question, because I think the expectations are different when somebody is sitting on the bench versus going to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And also, right?
Sorry, I didn't hear you. It cut there. Please repeat.
That the expectations from professional expectations are different. So somebody seeking care on a bench, there are different expectations maybe, and the grandmothers have different set of, you know, they don't have the same kind of professional boundaries that, you know, we are required to have. So it seems like, some of those limitation, you know, yes, sharing vulnerabilities on the bench might be different than sharing vulnerabilities when you see you're a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I'm just wondering how, even though that's a major part of the impact, it might not be translatable into all clinical settings. That's just a comment, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's very, you know, it depends on each one of us as clinicians. You know, I've learned over the years that we all have a story, and we all have our vulnerable moments. Therapists, clinicians are not made out of steel, and as long as you're familiar and in touch with your boundaries, it's okay to share. In fact, it helps the other person.
Okay, how are we doing on time? There's one more question from the chat. I love the ideas of having grandmas for the project. Have you run into any issues of generational barriers between the older and younger generations? For example, attitudes about dating culture, careers, or life goals?
That's a great question. That was the very reason why we carried out that clinical trial, which actually showed us, you know, we were expecting, you know, to see young people, you know, preferring to get therapy from other young people, you know, but that hasn't been the case. Well, at least in Zimbabwe. Maybe in some parts of the world it might be completely different. You know, so what we're seeing in Zimbabwe, as I was saying earlier on, is a lot more of this intergenerational connectedness, you know, which really supports the idea that grandmas can contribute something ones, and the young people can also contribute something positive. As I was saying, a lot of our young folks who come on attachment to the friendship bench have these, you know, that they're very technically savvy. They know how to use smartphones and devices, and they help the grandmas. And in return, the grandmas help the young people to be a lot more grounded, to deal with some of the challenges they're facing in their relationships. So we really haven't seen much of that. But again, I'm talking about Zimbabwe here. One of the reasons as well in Zimbabwe why we came up with a digital platform was the assumption that young people might prefer to use a digital platform as opposed to sit down on a bench with an old grandma, you know. But that, again, that wasn't the case. I showed the graph which shows that we're still getting a lot more people on the bench than people utilizing our digital platform, for instance.
Okay, I think I think we have to finish up so that you can have some time with our smaller panel. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you so much, Dr. Chibanda. So exciting, your work.